Today we're heading somewhere new. Most of my videos are recorded in the Lake District, because that's where the vast majority of the highest mountains in England are. In the last video we did take a break from the Lake District though, and we headed to the North Pennines to climb Cross Fell. Well, today we're headed to a new area called the Forest of Borland. We'll not be spending any time in a forest though, that's just the name of the area. We'll actually be spending the day hiking across a peat-covered moorland. So just like our hike up to Cross Fell, it's going to be an exposed day. Thankfully though, whilst I was caught in a storm during the last hike, today the weather was good throughout. It was pretty warm and it was completely dry. On paper, this should have been a fairly chilled out hike. I'm not hiking as far as I often do. Today we're covering about 16.1 kilometres, and for comparison, the last hike was 27.4 kilometres in total, so not too far. And we're also not doing as big an ascent as I usually do. Most of my ascents are just over 1,000 metres, but today we'll only be doing about 550 metres. It still turned out to be a pretty tough hike though, but not because of the weather this time. The two factors were the ground and navigation. The difficulty ramped up quite strongly throughout the day, so at the beginning it wasn't too bad. So don't be looking at the ground here with these gravel tracks and thinking, how is this difficult ground? The whole day overall was quite a mixed bag. The tracks at the bottom of the fell were pretty well established, right up to this building here, which is called Langdon Castle, which I presume is some kind of shooting hut these days. Some notes online link it to the Green Chapel of the Arthurian legend. Others mention it as a place to secure prisoners en route to Lancaster Castle. Whether you think it's a castle, part chapel, part prison, or just a stopping place in a long road, for us, it marks the end of the gravel track and the point where the hike starts to get more difficult, as you'll see me heading into the undergrowth. A handy sign points out the path, which would have been difficult to spot without it. Yes, we are heading the right way, and there is somewhat of a footpath beneath this chest-high undergrowth. And you'll slowly start seeing the foliage change throughout the day, as we started with green trees and bracken, and we move through to hardy grasses, and by the time we get to the top of the moorland, just about the only thing up there is heather. I mentioned navigation as a challenge. At this point it wasn't too bad. Although the tracks were fairly light, they were visible, and these occasional dives through the undergrowth were at least well signposted. Plus there was the occasional boardwalk. They didn't seem necessary today, but I imagine in wet weather they would be quite welcome. When I say navigation out here is bad, I'm really talking about the top of the fell. The track to the top was well marked, but as soon as you reach the top, the tracks on the peat moorlands themselves were not marked at all, honestly. Between the GPS and following the footprints left from previous hikers, it did seem that I was heading in the right direction for the most part, but I imagine navigation up here would be best done by taking a bearing and sticking to it, as opposed to just expecting to follow along a marked pathway. There are long stretches that follow along fences though, and visibility was good today, so it wasn't too difficult. But I think if visibility was particularly poor and you came away from the track, finding it again would be quite a challenge. I mentioned the ground being difficult, and really what I meant by that was kind of like how walking on sand is harder than walking on a stone pathway. Very similar here. It's not as bad as sand, but the peat underfoot did zap a little bit of energy. And of course, there's these occasional bog bits where suddenly you're walking along a path, the map says to keep going, but there is 24 inches of water in your way. At this particular point, I couldn't really see a good way around it, and it seemed to extend quite far in either direction. Eventually I crossed over the fence because it looked a little bit easier on the other side, but you do pass a couple of these water hazards, and they're pretty deep. I was wearing Gore-Tex mountain boots today. Mountain boots aren't necessarily the best thing to wear in good weather because they're very inflexible, so they're quite hard on your feet. But the benefit of this particular pair is they're Gore-Tex, so although going through this water hazard, my foot was in the water for quite a long time. Completely dry feet, so not too bad. Definitely better than my summer boots, which are not waterproof. At one point on this hike, I was just thinking about how awful a place this would be to get lost or stuck, to catch an injury and then to get stuck up here. It's just so exposed. I had great weather. I didn't have a fleece on or anything. It was about 13 degrees today, and very gentle winds, so honestly, perfect weather for a hike as far as I'm concerned. But this whole time I was just thinking, if you get stuck up here in bad weather, it is just such an awful place. And there isn't anything really to look at as we approach the summit. I hit the summit of Fair Snape Fell, and there is just a rock cairn at the top, and a lot of open moorland. And then I continued round to hit another summit, and it was a trig point with a lot of open moorland. I don't think this area gets a lot of love because, like I say, the tracks aren't very well marked. There's a couple of places where they are, but for the most part, the tracks aren't so well marked out here. And when I got to the trig point, it was really in quite a bad way. It wasn't the bright and shiny trig points that you see in the popular destinations. This one is having a hard time, to say the least. That is 2 summits for today, though, the first being Fair Snape Fell at 520 metres, and the second being Totteridge Fell at 497 metres, so a lot smaller than I usually do, but still pretty good hiking out here. The highest fell in this area is Ward's Stone, which is 561 metres. I have actually climbed Ward's Stone, but I don't have a video to point you to, I'm afraid. But I did just want to mention it because the fells in this area aren't huge, 561 metres being the highest. They're all relatively low, but that doesn't mean that it's all easy hiking. This kind of environment can be pretty hostile, so if you do come out here, make sure you come prepared. It would suck to get caught out here in a storm like I did when I climbed Cross Fell, so make sure you've got the equipment that you need if you're going to spend the day out here. That said, down in the trough of Borland, which is where I parked, it is really scenic, it's nice and sheltered amongst the trees, there's a lovely stream, great place to hang out, take a break at the end of a lovely hike, and of course there's a burger van if you need some refreshments, some snacks, something like that. But as always, now we're back at the base, I take another 2 tops off my list of fells to climb, I jump in the car and it's home time for me.